Post-traumatic stress is a big deal. I don't have to tell all of you that. We're all familiar with the metrics and the numbers, and yeah, they've shifted over time. The 22 a day. We're increasingly talking about mental health concerns, not just for combat veterans, but also folks that go through transition stress, separation stress, family members that are away from their loved ones while they're deployed, and having to deal with those very real stressors and the traumas from that. I mean, there's a wide range of causes for post-traumatic stress. There's a wide range of things that are associated with the military and military life, and just the industry of defense and arms that can lead to trauma for family and for service members. It's an unfortunate reality of the military. Now, what doesn't have to be an unfortunate reality is how we handle and respond to the mental health issues that our servicemen and women and their family members and their caretakers endure by virtue of their service. And we have failed as a country. We have failed. 22 a day is a disgrace. 12 a day, 10 a day, 2 a day is a disgrace. How many of those people were left hanging? And you can't save all of them. But we need to do better. And that's why organizations like the organization we're going to talk about today, that's why nonprofit organizations, government support organizations, community organizations pop up and exist to fill those gaps, to bridge the gap where the Department of Defense, where the VA, where state programs, where federal programs, where all of them miss the mark. There are some excellent, targeted nonprofit organizations that fill that gap, and often in very creative ways. Because not every service member experiences the same trauma. Not every service member experiences the same post-traumatic stress, if at all. And not every service member can cope with those stressors in the same way or heal from those stressors in the same way. So our response to these issues needs to be as varied as the issues that we are seeking to address, right? That's where the targeted nature of nonprofits is so important, especially in the veteran space. It seems like every other day, every night, there's a new nonprofit that pops up that it's like, we're helping veterans. We're the Hero Freedom Friendship Coalition of awesome, and then you ask them, so what do you do? We help veterans. Okay, where? Everywhere. Okay, what do you help them with? I don't know, whatever they need. Womp womp. Nonprofit fail. And the reason why that's a huge problem is because that takes donor funding away from the targeted good ones. And then let's say I'm a donor and I donate to the Freedom Patriot Friendship Fund of America.com. I give them $10,000 because they have a good looking website and a good video. I give them all sorts of money, and then they fail. They don't accomplish anything because they're not targeted, which happens more often than not. I don't get stewarded as a donor. I don't get maintained and retained as a donor. And all of a sudden, I'm disenfranchised and won't donate to other veteran serving organizations because in my mind, it's broken. The system is broken. Nonprofits are broken. The non-targeted, generic nonprofit organizations are a problem. But we're not talking about that today. It's Arts Month. And today we have, as a guest, two folks that work for a very excellent, very targeted nonprofit organization from right here in our backyard in southeastern Wisconsin. They do outstanding work in the area of using theatrical and dramatic arts to help veterans heal and cope with the stressors of post-traumatic stress and the post-service trauma. And in specific, Shakespeare, Shakespearean acting, stage acting, theater to help them heal. It's an incredible thing. Talk about targeted It's locationally bound. It's very specific. It's unique, and they help thousands. They've helped so many people in their illustrious tenure. I can't wait for you to hear more about it. I really can't. So we're going to dive into it right after this. If you couldn't tell, I have very strong opinions about the state of veteran nonprofits throughout the United States. Very strong opinions is what it is. I am who I am, you know. Hey, before we dive in and I introduce you to our distinguished guests, no matter what you're watching on YouTube, we have our first YouTube comment. I'm pretty sure it was just a bot. So, Rebecca, if you want to clarify whatever that was, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'm not going to put it up on the screen. Just a series of punctuations and uppercase letters, but whatever you're watching through LinkedIn or Facebook, YouTube, or if you're like our one Twitch follower, most of you are going to be watching via LinkedIn. That's just where our audience is. But feel free to drop something in the comments, ask questions, because these folks are extremely knowledgeable in this subject. And without further ado, happy to introduce our good friends Mark and Nancy from Feast of Crispian. Folks, sorry for the long introduction. I get spun up.
Oh, you were made for this, man. That was a great introduction. Thank you for that.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Thank you. You're too kind. Well, I enjoy the two of you. I enjoy Feast of Crispian, what you do. I'm a fan of your organization. So why don't you tell us, each of you? Maybe we'll start with Nancy.
First.
Yeah, what is your role within Feast of Crispian, and what is Feast of Crispian?
Oh my gosh, do we have, like, what did you say, 3-4 hours?
It's a big question. Yeah. In a nutshell.
I love talking about it, but it's always really hard to describe what we do, because I'm sure there's a bunch of people out there right now, when you said in particular Shakespeare, that are going, what?
Yeah, wait, what? Yeah.
And even after 10 years of doing this, I still find it really difficult to completely describe what it is that we do. But we are actors and theater practitioners who take acting skills, and in particular the stories and language of Shakespeare, into veteran communities as use of for PTSD mitigation is the target. We don't have any kind of entrance criteria or anything like that, so any veteran can come and join. Actually, we're happy to have anybody in any kind of traumatized community come into it. It's just a really amazing way, and we could there's kind of two major, there's a lot of things, but there's two major things that why we do work so powerfully. One is because the tight unit camaraderie of theater is such a good replica of what people miss out of the military. They really miss that camaraderie. The second part of it is the opportunity, because anybody who has
you got muted there for a second. I think you bumped your microphone. Now we can't hear you still. I don't know what happened. I felt like I heard the sound of somebody nudging a microphone, and then out you went.
Uh-oh.
No, still can't. Here, I'll let you troubleshoot that on your end, and you can. Oh, there you are. Gotcha.
Oh, got me again?
Yeah, don't move. I got you.
Move here. Okay, so I said the camaraderie, and the second part of it is the opportunity to take. I started to say anybody who has any kind of stress, but in particular PTSD. One of the things that really limits your ability to have a really successful and fulfilling life is these overwhelming emotions or no emotions, right? There's these two places that PTSD takes you into. And by using Shakespeare, and I can go into that a little bit later about the particulars of why we use Shakespeare, is very, very unique in the way that it works in the brain and the way that it allows us to get really big with emotions in a really safe way. But the idea that they don't have to use their own story, they don't even have to use their own emotions. We're totally cool with people just, as I put it, making the shapes of emotions, getting up and moving their bodies and using their voice and raising their voice and allowing them to experiment with big emotions in a way that they don't have to bring any of their own stuff into it, is just incredibly freeing. And it actually does get in, and it kind of loops some of their own emotion up and allows them to blow off some steam.
That's a great summation, and you're right. My next question was going to be why Shakespeare, but before we dive into that, Mark, the newly minted executive director. I just found out before the call that he's the new executive director, the head honcho of Feast of Crispian, as of like 2 days ago.
Yeah, I just found out too.
Well, first off, congratulations, well deserved. Mark and I go way back. This is a guy that knows his stuff for sure. So what do you do now, being the guy that, well, executive directors do it all? So maybe a more accurate question would be, what don't you do?
Yeah.
Or like they would be easier to answer, because you probably have to do it all. But what do you do with Feast of Crispian, and what brought you to Feast?
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for that. And so basically, what I do a lot of the background administrative work and the grant writing, a lot of the fundraising, of course. I'm just getting my shoes on as the executive director and all the duties that come along with that. So I'm not exactly sure what that's going to entail. My guess is it's going to be more administrative responsibilities tied with making sure that the revenue streams are where they need to be, and the reporting are where they need to be at.
So all the fun stuff, basically.
Yeah, all the fun stuff. But basically, my focus is to make sure that the practitioners and the veterans have the resources and everything that they need. The practitioners, particularly, to go out there and work with the veterans and provide this amazing service to them. So that's really what the focus of what I do is.
So what brought you to Feast then? Because it existed before you were there, like you joined it in progress, right? Or are you one of the founding members, or?
Yeah, my first exposure to Feast of Crispian was many years ago, before I even considered doing anything, working with them or anything. I was actually at a local collectivo with a mutual friend of ours, actually, Mark Flower.
Oh yeah, we
yeah.
love Mark. Yeah, you bet.
And he introduced me to Nancy and Bill and Jim while they were working on some scene work in the back, and I thought it was very nuanced, really innovative, but I didn't really ever see myself actually plugging into it in any kind of way until years after the fact. I just happened. Nancy had invited me out of her persistence, and I'm always appreciative of Nancy with her persistence on that, because it really opened up a whole other world that I had never thought that I would be a part of. To come to one of the weekend intensives, and during those conversations, it just came up that, hey, we're looking for a grant writer, and I said, well, I've done that, and they were like, you're hired. So, and then it just it kind of snowballed into what it is today. So yeah, I'm really grateful for that.
And before you got more entrenched in the admin work, in keeping the organization humming and the lights on and whatnot, were you a member? Were you somebody who took the stage? And
No,
never.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm a Marine veteran. I never would have imagined that I would ever be doing Shakespeare. I mean, aside from, I think it's very important for anyone who's going to be doing the background and supportive work and working with funders and everything. You really need to know and understand what it is that you're advocating for.
Right.
So I think it was really important that I got in there and actually did some of the scene work. I actually did back in, was it 2019? We produced the first ever National Veteran Theater Festival here local, where we brought in a group of, or several groups of veteran-orientated theater groups, put on a 3 to 4 day festival, and of course, Feast of Crispian had our original piece in there. It's called "And Come Safe Home," which I had a small part in, and which was amazing. So I actually have the experience of doing the scene work, working, like what Nancy said, with working with big emotions, which, veterans have some big emotions. And I'll tell you, and this is par for my elevator speech I usually give. It didn't really come home or land for me, the power of what this organization brings to the veteran community. It wasn't until I was in front of that audience at the Rep Theater And I just got done with my little scene with another veteran, with Cassio and Iago. And, the Shakespeare allowed me to focus and funnel all of this passion and energy that I have from my military experience and just from a lot of the frustrations of the veteran experience into that character. And, I just let it loose. And instead of getting this feedback, which I know, Adam, you can relate to, and I think all veterans can relate to, usually the feedback that you get from family, from counselors, from doctors, from community writ large is, we appreciate and thank you very much for your service, all of that window dressing anecdotal stuff that comes along with it. But we don't really want to hear, we really don't want to take in so much of what your stories are, because it can be very intense.
Right.
But, I don't fault them for that. So in other words, what I'm saying is that there isn't really a mechanism or a platform with which veterans can really unload. And Nancy, I'm sure we'll get into this more, their stories and share them without people kind of retracting and getting kind of put off by it. But here, when I was actually able to let loose into the character and really let it go, instead of that kind of, hey, Mark, calm down, go take your pills, or, go to the bar like your grandfathers did and just, be a man and drink it off. Instead of that kind of negative feedback, I got a standing ovation, which in my mind really just completely inverted the relationship of the veteran to the community. Because here was a neutral place where you brought the veteran community and the community writ large together. Plus, you also have Shakespeare as this kind of buffer where the veteran can feel comfortable enough to describe their stories and tell their stories without actually telling their stories. We have veterans that have some just unbelievable stories that, like we have one guy who never can actually tell his story. He always is saying it in the third person and always is kind of tiptoeing around the tulips because it is so intense and so painful. Shakespeare allows him to say it without actually saying it and get the catharsis out of effect out of it. So yeah, I think it's just a very innovative thing. I couldn't be happier to be a part of it. And that's
and I do want to talk more about just the impact that you've seen and the transformation you've seen in some of the people that have engaged in and also witnessed your programming and your performances. But I want to ask Nancy, I want to get to the question that's been in the back of my head. Why Shakespeare? What prompted Shakespeare of all things? And why connect that to people dealing with post-traumatic stress?
Yeah. And difficult for me to sum it up concisely, because it's such a, why we're here is the three founders and facilitators that bring this, me and Bill and Jim, is because Shakespeare was so much that way for us. It was just so powerful in our lives. And what I usually say is, like, most people who go into the arts and in any form of the arts, most people, not everybody, but most people are there to work out. They're there to process some kind of trauma that they've had in the past. It's just a way of expressing it, kind of like what Mark says, without getting negative feedback for actually saying, I went through this trauma. And so you put it out there in image and beauty, essentially. And Shakespeare was just something that did that for us. It really expressed so many things for us and got us so deeply in touch with our own humanity when we were doing Shakespeare, speaking those really incredible words. But there's that aspect of it that it's the stories are really so pertinent to everything that we are still working with as the human race, right? But also in Shakespeare's day, most men were in the military at some point, and so that military undercurrent is a huge part. So many, even in the comedies, so many of the comedies, like Much Ado About Nothing, they are just coming back from war, and it's about that idea of what do we do now as we're back from war, and we're gonna have romance and be in this really wonderful now we're going to have this wonderful life, right?
Right. Well, and
But
it's incredible how, unfortunately, war has been such a large part of, humanity. In if you look at our media, what we read, what we listen to, what we see in the movies and on the stage and whatnot, there's always an undercurrent of, maybe not directly like a war movie, but during the period of World War II or during the period of Vietnam or during the period of everything seems to be framed that way.
yeah.
So so you
Well, and that's
so you have
the continuum.
go ahead.
I'm just saying you're exactly right, because it's the continuum of
Mhm.
that. We just had a veteran this morning we have a class over at the VA on Wednesday mornings, and we had somebody this morning talking about how this work makes him feel not alone. When he does this work, he realizes that other people have felt this way forever. And so,
Right. Oh yeah, it is tied to the human condition.
yeah,
Unfortunately, war is never a good thing, and it's
yeah,
just some kind of reality of our world, unfortunately. But so you had experience, you and the other founders, with
mhm,
Shakespeare and the kind of transformative and healing power of Shakespearean acting. So
yeah.
what bridged the gap between that and you founding Feast of Crispian, a nonprofit that serves predominantly veterans dealing with
Yeah.
post traumatic stress? Like what bridged the gap there?
Well, that idea of what it had done for us, we thought, "Why not?" And, there are other examples of things that people working with Shakespeare in other ways, like the Shakespeare in the Prisons has been going on for, decades.
Oh, I didn't know
So,
that.
the idea came, and then yeah, then through the years, there's just so much more amazing stuff about the way I can't get off this without also talking about the fact that another part of my background is that I'm a somatic bodywork therapist as well. So I'm really interested in how the brain and the body work together and how we can
Mm,
harness that as a tool. And in so many bits of cutting edge science over the last decade, we've seen how the language of Shakespeare is incredibly powerful in the brain. It just works completely differently in the brain than
mm,
everyday language, and that actually goes directly to helping the brain be used in a different way for people who have PTSD. When you have PTSD, all the sensory parts of the brain are taken offline. They're not disconnected. There's not an injury there, but in nature, if we're coping with something, we'll numb out the parts that are really causing us problems and hurting us
mm.
and bothering us and giving us bad feelings. And so those are all those sensory parts, and that part of the brain goes offline. When you're
Yes.
using metaphor, like Shakespeare is poetry, and so it's just loaded with metaphor, which is that you're comparing two unlike things. So
Mm,
imagine comparing two unlike things. You have to go into the sensory parts of your brain and go, what's my experience with these two things that I can tie together, that I can see some similarities in? And when you do that, you gently open up those parts of the brain again. So you're asking the sensory parts of their brain to come back online. And the thing about the sensory parts of the brain is it puts this little ripple of feeling in the body.
mm,
You have a sensation in the body, and it's so small. It's not something that you're going to be aware of, but it's there. Anything that goes on in the brain, the body participates in. And so what we want for them is to start to be able to access some of this feeling again, and open up the fact that then they can have there's a possibility for good feelings to happen as well,
mm.
and to process out the feel. And I've really come to the point where I don't even like to call it good and bad feelings anymore, because all of the emotions are so important to our
Right.
life. It's really
I learned
important to
something similar from watching Daniel Tiger with my son. It's there's not, all emotions are valid. Sometimes you
yes.
feel two feelings at the same time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Big Daniel Tiger fan over here.
Nice.
So as far as dealing with emotions is concerned, and I'm gonna throw this one at Mark. So if you have the typical stereotypical military veteran archetype, the average civilian can't really picture, like you said, the tough and gruff, deal with it, go to the bar, handle it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and, like,
Well,
just deal with it. How do you get them, first of all, interested in Shakespearean theater? And then how do you get them to go on stage and open up? That's got to be like
well,
very challenging.
I think that kind of coattails to the outset of this podcast when you were mentioning the 22 suicides a day.
Hmm.
And I also think that tied into that, the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Yeah.
So we have these suicides every day, but we keep doing these same interventions, or the culture hasn't adjusted. So veterans continue to just keep going to the bar, suppressing all of those emotions, and of course, our culture is very militaristic, and your experience in the military is in large part to desensitize you, because and of course, if you are a combat veteran or have been exposed in a combat environment, it just is exacerbated by several orders of magnitude. So, what was the question again? Just so
how do you get someone dealing with those issues to join you and get on stage and let loose?
They got to see it, and I think a large part is guys like me or like you, other veterans, of having that courage and making a decision that I'm not going to repeat the same mistakes, where someone's got to jump off of that wheel and try something else. For me personally, I mean, I took all the pills. I've been through the PTS programs at the VA a couple times. So I've done everything that they said, and it didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made me feel worse, to be quite frank. And that's not to disparage the VA or anything like that. That's not why we're here. But I do.
It works for some people. That approach works for some people, but not everybody.
Perfectly fine. I think that we can, we don't have to put ourselves in a box. I think that what we do here at Feast, of course, is not the end all be all. It's not a panacea in that regard, but I think as a supplement or as an alternate to the clinical side of things, because the clinical side of things is developed around a very Freudian, functional, input, output, diagnosis, treatment, which is good for some people. Maybe that's effective, but I think for large part there's a huge gap, which has to do with the more human and spiritual component of the veteran experience. That I think we're, the 22 veteran suicides a day. Look, if that model was so effective, we wouldn't have these outcomes. Right. So, so we need to be more innovative. And what Nancy and these guys have done here with Feast of Crispian and other nonprofits that are very specific and focused, like you mentioned earlier, that are valid and everything, are trying to think outside that box. And that's exactly what I think we've done here. And I think it's incredibly potent. And it has been for me. Like, it has completely blown open a world of things for me that I never thought, because I was exactly that archetype you mentioned. If you would have talked to me 5-6 years ago about, hey, man, let's go do Shakespeare to get over, I would have just
you'd have laughed.
I would have reached out and said, I'm a tough guy, I'm a Marine. That's not what I do. But that's the ego side of things talk. And I think if other veterans see other veterans actually getting some benefit out of this, then that will affect the culture at large. And I think it is. I think the way that I look at it, harkening back to your previous point, is the VA and the clinical end of things. That's a hammer. Yes.
And not everybody's problems are nails.
Well, like you say, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Right, exactly. Some people's problems are nails. Yeah. Some people's problems are screws, and you need a screwdriver. Sometimes you need a hammer to tap the first part of a screw in, and then you need a screwdriver to finish it off, or what, like sometimes the tools need to work together.
Sometimes you need Shakespeare.
Sometimes you need, Shakespeare's a screwdriver.
I think it's really interesting. I think we're in a very unique moment in this in time, and when as this goes, because I think I do see a shift, and a shift in the consciousness of the veteran community, which I think will eventually affect the larger society. Because the veteran community is usually we're always the tip of the spear. It doesn't matter if we're in the military or not in the military. people pay attention to the veterans, man. And if they
Right.
see veterans and they see the things that are working for them, well, then it can work for them too. So I think it's really opening the door to a lot of really good things, really good things. So
So let's talk about impact, and I'll open this up to any of you. You know, you mentioned that the thing that gets, you know, veterans who may be dealing with these issues to join up with your very important cause and to open up in a way that may be completely and utterly foreign to them for their entire lives
oh yeah.
is merely showing them. And so I guess my next question is what hurdles or speed bumps do you have between your mission and the end result and the impact? Is it just getting the word out? Is it a communications thing, or are there other hurdles that you're dealing with as an organization that are preventing you from achieving your strategic vision?
Nancy, I'll let you take that one first.
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to speak to that. You know, the first thing that pops into my head is, well, it's always money. There are certain things that you can throw money at that actually do get better. I wish that we had a bigger um, community of theater practitioners who were waiting in line to come on board with us, that were able to handle this particular kind of
Mm,
mission, which is very different
right.
than a lot of other things that we do as actors and theater practitioners. But really, the for me, comes down to just getting people in the door. I mean, you're right that
Mm,
once we've got people in the door, and and the large portion of veterans that we work with come out of residential programming in the VA situation. So as Mark was talking about, for a lot of those folks, they've hit the bottom of the barrel.
mm,
They don't know what to do at this point. Their lives are really overwhelmed by the things that are going on. And so when you say come and do Shakespeare, they're like, whatever, I'll try anything.
Yeah, I'll try anything. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. And so what I say when I'm trying to talk someone into coming for the weekend is just come and give it a try.
Mm,
And I find over and over again that if they come Friday night, they will stay through the weekend. It's very rare for us to lose anybody, and almost entirely the folks that come in on Friday night are going, I'm just gonna watch. I think this is
sure.
dumb, but I'm gonna check it
Sure.
out. And then they're really turned on by it very, very quickly, by what goes on in the room, by the um, the the feeling that they get, that of the, and we hear a lot of times when I'll say what's going on is I'm using the words that we are told. You know, they tell
Mm,
us that they just feel such a freedom to be able to come in, and that to be not judged, and to be you know, there's nobody sitting there with a chart that they're making notes on or any of that kind of thing, and they really have a sense of freedom into it. And so
mm,
yes, I mean
mm.
the thing we need is just the way of getting them in the room the first time. And once we get them in the room, they usually very quickly feel the benefits of what's going on for them there.
Man,
Yeah.
I feel like I could talk to you guys for another half an hour, another hour. There's just so much to discuss here. But oh, Mark, were you about to make a point?
Yeah, just to kind of coattail what Nancy just said, and how do we, the strategy of, like, how do we get to the veteran community at large,
Mhm.
and how does that equate then to getting reciprocity in terms of donation? I didn't know and learned until I got on board with Feast of Crispian was the history of theater. And maybe Nancy, you can back me up on this, but the history of theater goes all the way back to the Peloponnesian War, right? The
The
Greeks,
Persian War.
the Persian Wars.
Yeah.
Well, that it was born out of returning soldiers and warriors. Is that right? Am I? Am
Yeah.
I?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
So
the history of theater as we know it came out of the Persian Wars, where when a battle would be over and the warriors would come home, the entire community would gather, and Aeschylus came up with this way of putting their stories out for everybody to see, so that the whole community could feel what they
yeah,
had been through and hear their whole thing. And the idea of that was then the entire community shared in all of the trials and tribulations of that. And that is something
Wow.
we have so
That's
lost
that's
in
I
this.
didn't
I
know
mean,
that.
that's something. Yeah, that's absolutely something. When we talk about veterans transitioning, it's always just, well, here's a job, and now you're good to go. What are you complaining about?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that component that she just elucidated, I think is a big piece of it that we've been missing, and I think Feast is part of that new innovative is function of actually providing that mechanism for to bridge that gap between the veteran community and the larger community and everything. And I think it's also part of the myth story that we tell ourselves as veterans. I think that
Mm.
if we were to include that theater, because it goes to, like, how do we convince some of these tough guys to come in and
Yeah.
do Shakespeare, right? Well, if we remind them that,
It's a
theater
free
was
beer at the
born out
meeting.
of that, that
I'm
changes
just kidding.
the dynamic, the consciousness of it. You know what I mean? And then that will eventually, I think, in my mind at least, will translate into donors taking a harder look at
Right.
this. So
Okay, so and I was totally joking when I said free beer at the meetings there. Bad joke, but yeah, you said, how do you get the tough guys there?
yeah.
Free sandwiches or whatever. I don't know, but
We do that.
well, how does I I don't want to end. I feel like I have so many more questions.
No,
I
it goes
just want to
fast.
throw one more penultimate question at you here. Um, how did COVID shape the progression of your organization? Because my assumption is that this is a very brick and mortar, face to face, in person thing. And if getting the word out to people is how is your bread and butter and how you grow and scale and stay afloat as an organization, that kind of took the rug out from underneath you, didn't it? And did it lead to any changes in your approach that persisted, or did you just hold on for dear life and wait for the bulk of it to be over? And obviously it's not over, but yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm gonna speak to that, and I'm even gonna usurp Mark's part of it because one thing I do want to say is uh, that our local foundations were unbelievably supportive of us
Mm. Mhm.
throughout COVID. It was really important to, we get money from the Bader Philanthropies and from the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, and both
Mhm.
of them came through just so amazingly because both of them really wanted to see this organization survive. You're
Mm.
absolutely right that it is face to face. If we were to go virtual entirely from here on out, we'd be done.
Mm.
There's just no way of recreating what it is that we do in the room with people. However, that being said, there's always things that come out of these kinds of things that are really that have been really valuable. COVID happened at the same time as the Black Lives Matter
Mhm.
protests were really, really ramping up, and that
Mhm.
really pushed us to look at a better way. And I don't have to tell you, your veteran community. I expect that people of color serve in the military at much higher rates
Mm.
than white people do, and so we're always looking for better ways of supporting our veterans that have specific needs in their identification as veterans and we were able to hire theater professionals, actors that are also people of color. And these are
Mm.
professional actors who are also veterans. And we hired
Mhm.
them to do virtual classes that we're calling our Safe Spaces classes
Sure.
for Black veterans only. And then we have one hopefully coming up in the spring for women veterans only. And so stuff comes out of it. We'll never give those up because those were so popular and so valuable.
Mm.
But yes, indeed, what we do needs to be done face to face, and
Yeah.
I think that's we're pack animals. We're human beings. We need each other. We need that voice vibrating our body in the room and being
Right.
able to interact. So.
Well, perhaps in the future when the metaverse ends up being a thing and we're able to more accurately recreate the human experience virtually, but maybe a few years away. In the meantime, uh, webinars and Zoom don't have the same kind of magic. So I'm glad to learn more about what you do and how you do it and kind of the impetus behind it. Just more and more impressed by your organization. Every time I get to know more people involved in it, I've seen performances from Feast of Crispian at our Veterans Light Up the Arts event that we have annually. Very moving, very important stuff. And so thank you for what you do. How can somebody see a performance? How can somebody get involved? How can somebody reach out to learn more about what you do?
Well, all of our past performances are on YouTube. They can just go and search Feast of Crispian on YouTube, and they can find even our most recent one from August. That was a really interesting and unique original production as well that focuses specifically on Vietnam veterans. If they want to get involved with us, and I do want to say that our core work is our workshops that are held in the VA and sometimes outside the VA as well, and that's what we're really about, because that's where it really gets down to supporting veterans. The shows, it is a very big deal to commit to the time period and the stress and all of the stuff that goes on with putting on a full production. So that's a really narrow part of what we do, and that we think of that really as our outreach and going out to the civilian population to educate them better on and actually, I don't even think educating is the thing. It's just to get them more comfortable just interacting with veterans and talking to them.
Right.
But for our real work, any veteran, anytime is welcome to come to our workshops. We just had one canceled because of COVID, but we will be back on it, and they should just go to our website, www.feastofcrispian.org.
And I got it scrolling across the bottom now. For those of you that want to learn more or potentially donate to this very important, very targeted, it's one of the best in the state of Wisconsin, and we're proud to call you guys friends. So I'll ask you to hang on the line for just 1 minute. Nancy, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. Folks, I love that one. Man, I was a fan of this organization going into it, and I'm an even bigger fan now. This is so cool. And I think that the biggest takeaway for me, I thought maybe theater as a recreation, as a way to escape from, trauma and turmoil and stress. But the connection, that was the assumption I made going into it. But the connection that I didn't make was that it empowers veterans to emote their very real emotions in a comfortable, safe environment, potentially using other people's story, using other people's words, using Shakespeare, and using that foundation to get some very real stuff that's pent up out. That's amazing. And I never considered that before. There's so many great, man, this is why we do Arts Month. People like veterans at Wisconsin Veterans Chamber Arts Month. What? First of all, there's a lot of talent in the military and veteran community, very diverse community. You'd be surprised. We got musicians, actors, actresses, visual artists. We've got performers of all kinds, artists of all kinds in the military. We're not just a robotic hive mind sort of worker bees. Okay. We're diverse and strong and professional, and we have innovative ideas and insights and creativity that deserves to get shared with the world. So that's the first one. And the second point is like, it's a great opportunity to heal in any discipline of the arts. Like, we're talented, we deserve to share it with everybody, and we also deserve to not feel self-conscious about using that as an avenue for self-expression and healing. That whole tough guy thing, tough guy or tough gal. I was in the military, so, we need to feel comfortable and encouraged to express ourselves, because if we can't do it, our lives are in danger as a community. And there are organizations like Feast of Crispian that are really leading the charge. What a cool one. We're here every week, office hours live, 11:30 a.m. every Wednesday. And also this interview, this dialogue will be out audio only. Check out the Wisconsin Veterans Forward podcast on all major podcast platforms. Appreciate all of you, friends. Exciting stuff. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and weekend. We'll see you next week.